Welcome back to Dead Sleep, True Crime for Bedtime. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Nancy Miller, the creator of this podcast. And in case you're curious, I have been in the media game for a very long time. As a writer, an editor, a producer, working in magazines, radio, and podcasts, I've worked on all kinds of stories, including true crime. And I bring all of that experience to this podcast, my creation, my baby, which is why Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime is listener supported and 100% ad-free. So you can relax, knowing that you can listen to all 93 episodes and never encounter a single loud, obnoxious ad that will blast you awake. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Patreon. I know times are tight and every penny counts. Dead Sleep is about $5 a month. And so if you can afford that, I really appreciate it. And if you can't, that's okay too. Now, as we settle in, here's a little something about tonight's episode. Drawn from a discovery I made just this past week. In anticipation of Dead Sleep's 2-year anniversary, I was looking at the top 10 most popular episodes of the podcast. 2 out of the 3 top episodes of Dead Sleep aren't actually about crime. The 2 episodes that are very popular are about survival. Those top episodes, in case you haven't heard them, are The Girl Who Wasn't There and Mr. Sandman. Now, The Girl Who Wasn't There, that's a medical mystery about a woman whose mind is essentially kidnapped when she falls into a mysterious catatonic state for nearly 20 years. And the second is that episode, Mr. Sandman, about a rich real estate executive who ventures into Joshua Tree to get back to nature, only to find him desperate to return to civilization when he takes one wrong turn and gets hopelessly lost. Which brings us to tonight's story, about a woman in New York City who has to go face to face with a monster, an unstoppable force determined to destroy everything she loves. And this woman's only hope of survival is facing that thing head on. And strictly speaking, this episode doesn't have a murder or a crime in it, but it is a saga about destruction and the very nature of life and death and what it takes sometimes to struggle to survive, especially when you are up against a large, unstoppable force, a set of circumstances that might keep you up at night because they are way beyond your control. If you have ever felt that way, you might appreciate this episode. And just quickly to give credit where credit is due, this story is drawn in part from a fantastic documentary, a short, by a director named Angelo J. Guglielmo Jr. And I'd actually hoped to do a story on Angelo and the subject of this documentary a few years ago, but I never got the chance. So I will link to this free short documentary in the show notes. You can watch it on Vimeo. It's only about 10 minutes long. Of course, this is the Dead Sleep version, which means there are a lot of extraneous details to exhaust our minds. This is a story I'm calling Into the Void. Oh my God. What fresh hell is this? Whatever you do, don't go out there. It's ugly out there. It's filthy. It's hideous. It's crowded. It's dangerous. It's disgusting. It's New York City. Don't go out there. One morning, actually many mornings, In the fall of 2011, that was the inner monologue, the vicious, dark thoughts of a 40-something woman named Gwyneth Leach. And this fresh hell, well, it was another day in her neighborhood in Midtown Manhattan called Hell's Kitchen. Hell's Kitchen. The exact origin of how that neighborhood got its name is still up for debate. But there were 3 undisputed facts about that neighborhood throughout its history. Hell's Kitchen was mostly poor, it was mostly Irish, and it was always dangerous. According to the old archives from the New York Times, from the mid-1800s into the 1980s, this Midtown area, from 34th Street to 59th Street, between 8th Avenue and the Hudson River, was one tough neighborhood. An area where crime was so commonplace. There was an actual street, 11th Avenue, which was nicknamed the Avenue of Death. For years, a gang called the Hell's Kitchen Gang in the 1930s was one of the city's most brutal. And Irish mobsters ruled that area Godfather style until the 1960s. But that was a long time ago. The old 6-story tenement buildings that used to pack entire families and were filthy and impoverished were now coveted for their large windows, wood floors, and nice unspoiled views with plenty of sunshine, thanks to New York City laws limiting the number of tall buildings in that area. Now, it's fair to say in 2011, as Gwyneth Leach bitterly left her family's apartment one morning, the only blood, sweat, and tears along that sidewalk were her own. You see, Gwyneth was an artist, a painter, and the only real threat following her every step in Hell's Kitchen was the silver-tongued devil dancing in her own mind, telling her the world was a terrible place. New York City, a cesspool, and there was no use in even trying, that she should go back home, go back to bed, go watch TV, deal with this all tomorrow. This force is the brutal and bullying gang leader who controls the emotional turf of nearly every artist. In fact, every person who's ever wanted to do something. But it's that little devil over our shoulder that tells us to forget it. Put it off another day. Deal with it tomorrow. Procrastination. It sounds like a modern dilemma. But rest assured, the word procrastination, it goes back centuries, all the way back to the 1500s. Pro is Latin for move forward, and crastinus means belonging to tomorrow. Though the urge of putting off something you have to do until tomorrow, well, human beings have been doing that for thousands of years. At least since we became intelligent enough to be aware that there was a tomorrow, and one could discern what needed to be done today versus tomorrow, and still survive. And while procrastination isn't a uniquely human instinct, in fact, it appears pigeons procrastinate. We are the only species who indulges in procrastination as a form of self-sabotage. Our ape ancestors, they don't. The bonobo, one of the smartest apes with whom we share a complex evolutionary history, well, bonobos do something called precrastinate. That is, the bonobo tackles the toughest task first, choosing to get the challenging work out of the way. But for Gwyneth, the forces of procrastination were so strong, so demonic, that every single morning was a fight. And her walk to her studio, maybe 10 or so blocks away, it wasn't even a commute. It was combat. And she cursed and swore at this disgusting city, this dirty sidewalk, all of these goddamn people, until she turned the key to open the front door to the Midtown building where her studio was located, riding an old cranky elevator as it hoisted her noisily all the way up to the 13th floor, then heaved her out into her artist space. And it was then, and only then, when she opened that door to that space, did the world change, the devils disappear, and the angels sing. A space of just a few hundred feet, filled with all of her paints and canvases, the evidence of progress, her symbols of hope. The entire room bathed in the most glorious and soft morning light, courtesy of the one giant window that faced north. But when she stood in front of it, the view gave Gwyneth a near panoramic shot of New York City. An unspoiled skyline with a vista that stretched out into infinity. This view was what made Gwyneth's daily struggle worth it. That when she got there, she couldn't believe what she was fighting. This was the place of her dreams. That, and of course, the cup of coffee she bought each day on her way to that space. A daily bribe that forced her to leave the house, in agreement with herself. That if she got up and walked to the studio, she was allowed to treat herself to a nice big cup of coffee, which she drank on the way. Once at the studio, as she finished her coffee, she'd seat herself in front of that window, which was practically knee to ceiling. She'd begin her daily ritual. Getting out a sketch pad, paper, and begin to draw or paint that view. Gwyneth Leach came from a family of artists. Back in Philadelphia, where she was raised, her mother and her grandfather were both respected artists throughout their lives. So was Gwyneth's sister Kitty, who was a costume designer and taught at the Tisch School in New York. As for Gwyneth, she too had worked as an artist since she graduated from art school in the 1980s, and then moved to Scotland, where she spent many years working in teaching until she decided it was time to come back to the States and try and make it as an artist in New York. And at first, her life in New York seemed charmed. A landlord in Hell's Kitchen rented her and her husband and their 2 children an apartment because, the landlord said, she liked the family's vibe. The family had stayed in the neighborhood ever since, and Gwyneth had that studio on West 39th Street, a coveted piece of real estate, for years. In 2011, she was in her late 40s, and after taking some time to raise her daughters, was throwing herself back into painting, hoping to tap into a new era of creative fulfillment, and, who knew, maybe some commercial success. Gwyneth often said her superpower was in finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. But lately, her work, it was good, but not extraordinary. She showed her eye-pleasing landscapes in galleries, featured in a lineup of female artists, etc., 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 and she landed a few prestigious grants. Gwyneth was no slouch, but she was in a painter purgatory. Not failing, but not thriving either, not really. It was hard, looking down the barrel at 50 and feeling like you were starting all over again. She couldn't complain. She'd won awards, got recognition, but she was still living hand to mouth, wondering how or if she'd ever really break through. Gwyneth was stuck, unable to move forward into whatever that next exciting creative stage was because, well, it was still so hard to let go. She'd lost both of her parents recently, in a short window of time. Her father, a prominent lawyer and professor, died in 2010, and her mother had just passed away in the summer of 2011. Now, these deaths weren't a surprise. They'd lived long and happy lives and died in their late 80s. But it was still a loss. She was officially an orphan, and her closest blood relative was just her slightly older sister, Kitty. And she was grateful for Kitty, and she was grateful for her painting. Painting was how she coped, the one thing that was hers. Painting was a form of protection from herself and what she called the void. The dark place her mind went to if she wasn't careful. Her painting created a safe barrier between herself, the self who was a mother, a wife, a person of this world, and that void. And Gwyneth, well, she feared one day, if she wasn't careful, if she didn't paint, well, that barrier would be gone. And that void would drag her down into the darkness forever. And so it was, day after day, the morning walk through these dirty, filthy, crowded city streets, then to her happy place in the studio, putting on her horn-rimmed glasses, pushing back her reddish-brown hair, throwing on a paint-splattered smock, an old man's shirt, then staring out the window, paintbrush in hand. If she accomplished nothing else, she at the very least would paint that view, and that barrier between Gwyneth and the void remained intact. One day, as she sat down in front of that view and realized she didn't actually have any paper to draw on, she glanced over at her now empty coffee cup. And for the first time, really, she noticed its surface. She noticed the paper had a little bit of tooth to it, and the smooth, slightly glossy surface was perfect for paint. A deli coffee cup that inside held just 16 ounces, but on the outside, it held infinite possibilities. So she took her paintbrush to the surface of that coffee cup, just noodling around a little, seeing just how much of this view could fit on this small cylindrical surface. And she actually managed to do a stunning rendering of this landscape that she looked at every day, just scaled down to the surface of this coffee cup. And so began a new ritual. Buying that cup of coffee, drinking it, and once finished, she would paint her morning view directly onto that coffee cup. And she did it day after day after day, putting the little cups to the side until she assembled a decent collection, never really thinking it would add up to much more than capturing a moment, until one day someone suggested that she didn't just have painted coffee cups. If she artfully arranged all of these cups together, almost like lanterns, well, that was art. What? Gwyneth wondered. Who would want to look at a bunch of old doodled-on coffee cups? Well, it turned out a lot of people. And soon enough, Gwyneth Leach's coffee cups, which were now in the hundreds, became an art installation featured in New York City. Then soon, those cups that she'd painted on were in demand. This included a collaboration with the clothing brand Anthropology, who did a whole installation with Gwyneth Leach's cups, and then took those patterns and made them into ceramic cups that they sold at the store. Somehow she'd done it. She'd found the extraordinary in the ordinary, and it led her to a level of success she'd never thought possible. She was written about in art magazines, even the New York Times, and for a blissful moment in time, a few years, Gwyneth was able to keep a safe distance from the void, the barrier between her and that sense of darkness and despair, as high and secure as a seawall. That is until the summer of 2015, when that barrier between Gwyneth and the deep darkness came crashing down. When Gwyneth's mother and father got sick, their illnesses were diagnosed as chronic and terminal. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. It was painful, but it was inevitable. It was what it was. There was no choice. But when her sister Kitty died, in the summer of 2015, it was a different story. Kitty, too, had suffered a long and chronic illness, but it was one that was harder to see. An illness that couldn't be tracked through PET scans and biopsies. Only assurances from Kitty herself that things were going to be fine. She was fine. Kitty was, by any measure, an extraordinary talent. At 58 years old, she was a multiple award-winning costume designer and beloved teacher and generous mentor at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, with a drama department known for producing Oscar-winning alumni including Lady Gaga, Angelina Jolie, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Mahershala Ali. Kitty's cause of death? Well, on camera, Gwyneth would say her sister Kitty took her own life. But Kitty's obituary suggested something more sinister. That Kitty's life was taken. Kitty was killed. Not murdered, but killed. In a way only Ernest Hemingway could articulate in his novel A Farewell to Arms, a passage that was quoted in Kitty's obituary. The world kills the very good, the very gentle, and the very brave impartially. Hemingway wrote that in 1929. His novel, A Farewell to Arms, was his semi-autobiographical account of his experiences as an ambulance driver in Italy during World War I. He wrote about the helplessness and the hopelessness he felt witnessing all of that senseless violence and loss. For Gwyneth, it was something similar. A helplessness as she witnessed her sister sink into a deep depression, in an overwhelming grief that she couldn't, she didn't, she hadn't done enough. And now it was too late. The loss of her parents, and now her sister, pushed Gwyneth ever closer to that dark void. And as always, the only way she would be able to keep it away was by making things, painting, drawing, producing work at a furious pace. Forcing herself to go to that studio, gaze out at that view, letting the light of her space wash over her as she tracked the only life she could see, the sun, as it shifted by the hours, the days, the seasons. As best she could, Gwyneth poured all of her energy into painting that view onto those paper cups. But it wasn't enough. The dark void was coming for her. In fact, the dark void would soon make itself at home, directly across the street. One morning in November of 2015, about 4 months after her sister's death, as Gwyneth tried to capture the morning light before it faded into the day, she caught something else. Men, machines, movement. Enormous machines dug into the ground, cracking concrete like walnut shells, finding soil underneath, then scooping soil and taking all of that earth away until there was nothing there, really, except a deep, dark hole, one she could see, a perfect view from her window on the 13th floor. So, there was a building going up. Such was life in New York City, where construction never ended. The surprise was how tall that building was going to be, even here on 39th Street, along the border of Hell's Kitchen, there was going to be a skyscraper, at least 40 floors. And that building would be built directly across the street from Gwyneth's studio, which meant her view from that studio, right there on the 13th floor, it was gone. In its place would be a massive, solid, black glass and metal monster. A monolith that did not bounce light. It absorbed all of the light. Its only power was that building's ability to cast shadow and darkness, a shadow of doom, over Gwyneth's entire existence. They were going to have to fight this thing. But how? There were legendary activists in New York City, those who fought the greedy developers and, once in a while, saved something, a community garden. But to Gwyneth and the other people in her building, the development of this skyscraper was going to move forward no matter what. And it's amazing how one can feel with just a shift in perspective. In Gwyneth's landscapes from her window, the skyscrapers she saw in that skyline, they always seemed majestic and transcendent. But this one, so close, this jet black monolith, it was oppressive and unstoppable. So Gwyneth was going to leave. But if she did, where would she go? It'd be hard to find a studio like this anywhere in Manhattan. So she decided to stay. And with this came a grim project that she would stare out that window day after day, and she'd draw the monolith's rise, knowing that what she was drawing was the end of her creative life, possibly for good. In the beginning, Gwyneth had to admit, looking down from her 13th floor, she felt powerful, godlike. From her perch, the view of all the men working on the ground, they looked so small, like little Lego minifigurines. And there she was, omniscient, aware of their every move, while she was invisible. And not only was she sketching what she saw on her paper cups, she was also shooting video and taking photos. At one point, she was pleased to discover that construction had abruptly stopped. And there were rumors that this building wasn't going to be built after all, which was great, because it had barely started, and she could get back to her life, her view, like it was before. Then, in the winter of 2016, out of nowhere, the work resumed. Only this time, it was double the number of people, and they worked at lightning speed to make up for that delay. And Gwyneth could feel the surge of energy, and the work on the building was happening so fast, and the construction site was now so ambitious. A coffee cup couldn't contain the scale of this whole thing. Gwyneth found herself moving to bigger pages, drawing, sketching, and painting as the building rose one floor at a time. Until suddenly, it seemed, the construction site was eye level. From the distance, which was really just across the street, she could see these construction workers now toiling day and night, dawn until dark. And from her window, she had to admit, it was like having box seats to an incredible show. The open floors of the construction site were like the perfect stage. And in the dark, she could see giant arc lights casting the workers in a purple glow, their tools striking steel, causing sparks to fly. And now, unexpectedly, Gwyneth found herself waking up and rushing to get to her studio at dawn, so she didn't miss a thing. so she could capture the construction site as the sun came up. And she had to admit, she was awestruck by its beauty, by the movement, by the activity, by the colors, by the light, and by the work, day after day. And from her window, she reveled in being invisible, or so she thought she was. One day, as she worked in her window, she noticed one of the men on the construction site noticing her. Curious, the worker nodded to the other workers, who also turned around. Gwyneth froze, unsure exactly what these men could see and how they were going to react. But she continued until one snowy morning, a worker turned towards her. They were now close enough that she could see his eyes behind a bandana he wore to keep his face warm. And he paused for a moment, and then he looked directly at her in the window. And then he lifted both of his arms, stretched out the index and middle fingers on both hands, making the shape of two peace signs. Then he waved his arms and yelled, "Hello." Gwyneth waved back. Now all of the workers walked towards the edge of the construction site, as curious about her as she was about them. And they hollered at Gwyneth, asking her what she was doing. And Gwyneth, not sure what to say, she impulsively flung open one of the giant windows, and as the cold winter air blasted in, she stuck out one of her canvases so they could see that she was painting them. And they, in turn, were delighted. And now, when she started each day and looked out that window, they looked at her, and they waved and posed, even danced, as she laughed, her hands moving quickly over the canvas. Weeks passed, then months, then years. The monolith grew and grew until those floors were finished, and the men moved up to the next level, then the next. Gwyneth wouldn't exactly know how far up. It was too high to see. But by 2018, the building was finished. Her view was gone. But her career was just beginning. Again. The monolith, Gwyneth thought, was going to end her creative career. But instead, it gave her a whole new purpose. Her scores of drawings, paintings, photographs, videos would become her next great success. Her series, called The Monolith, was featured in galleries all over the world. And her fascination with the monolith would continue on to other construction projects. In these days, Gwyneth doesn't even paint in her studio. She often brings a travel easel to job sites across Midtown Manhattan, where she's documented the rise of numerous skyscrapers that have dramatically changed Manhattan's cityscape, from Hudson Yards to the multiple towers of Billionaires Row on West 57th Street, to One Vanderbilt next to Grand Central Station, and most recently, 270 Park Avenue. What's also really cool is some of her biggest fans are the construction workers on the site. The electricians, the builders, even the developers have purchased paintings from Gwyneth, along with commissioned original work. The kind of work that can bring an artist a lot of money. And of course, just as important, if not more so, a sense of creative fulfillment most artists aspire to. And much like Manhattan, Gwyneth has no plans to stop anytime soon. All of this time, Gwyneth thought she was chronicling a building. She would realize, of course, afterwards, that what she was really capturing was her own grief. Confronting a grief of the loss of her parents and her sister that couldn't be stopped or shifted or moved. Just bravely faced, stared at, straight on, looked at and studied until it was eventually embraced. Until one day, it's just finished. And it's time to move on. Thank you so much for listening to this unique survival story and for supporting Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. Again, I'm going to share the link to this short documentary that is free on Vimeo. That is fantastic and very moving and uplifting in a way that you might not expect. And I will be back next week with an all-new story of survival in a more traditional true crime sense. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to explore each episode of Dead Sleep with you. And until next time, nighty-night.